Before we start the video, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you. And now, let's go. Story 1. Matthew, what the hell is this? My friend, Matthew, had asked me to come over for the night to help him with a little project he had been working on for the last few weeks. Granted, I hadn't seen him for those weeks, so I assumed it must have been very personal for him, so I agreed almost immediately. But as I stood there confused in my friend's basement, staring down at the mass underneath a blanket laying on a table, I wish I didn't. It's what I've been working on. And what you've been working on is... I responded in an annoyed tone. Do you seriously not remember? We were watching that movie a few weeks ago, and I said I was going to try and do the same thing. I narrowed my eyes at him, not entirely sure if Matt was messing with me, or he really thinks I remembered a movie we watched weeks ago. No, Matt, I don't. How about you refresh my memory, so I can better understand what the hell I'm looking at on your table? He let out a slight sigh. We were watching those old horror movies, and the one with the scientist and the monster came on. You made a joke about how it would be cool if someone could actually do that, and I said I probably could if I had the time. Well, here it is. He gave me a smile before looking down at the table. It took a moment for my mind to remember exactly what he was talking about. Are you talking about Frankenstein? I was high as shit that night. Why would you take anything I said with actual serious and dash? I cut myself off as my gaze roamed over the mass, slowly recognizing the outline as a silhouette. Matthew, what exactly is under this blanket? It's the monster from the movie. He reached down and pulled the blanket back. Well, it's the closest I could get. I'm no expert on this stuff. The best way I can describe what I saw was as Matt had said, the monster from Frankenstein. Well, at least kind of looked like it. Unfortunately, it wasn't the greenish hue that we know. Instead, it was a mix of skin tones with varying degrees of age and damage to each part. A busted up black forearm from a teen and an older looking white chest with scars on it, just to name a few. The fingers on the right hand were mismatched, all different sizes and colors. The face was a mixed up jigsaw of at least 5 different people from what I could tell. I stared in horror at the unsightly creation laying on the table and without thinking, grabbed Matt's shirt collar, pushing him against the nearest wall. When the fuck did you do? I screamed as loud as my voice would allow me. What? I did what you said. I made the thing from the movie. He looked at the table and then to me, hoping I would understand him. Where the hell did you get these things from? Jesus, Matt, did you dash? He cut me off before I could finish. Christ, of course not. I'm not a murderer, dude. I've been getting them from the hospital. I stared at him, still in disbelief at what he had done. You know how I've been working at the hospital for a while now? Well, when we would have accidental deaths or organ transplants going around, I would take some stuff. He smiled at me. Stuff. This isn't stuff, man. This is parts of people. I let go of his collar and started to pace around the room, covering that thing back up with the blanket. Look, you said it would be cool if someone made the thing. He held his hands out for me to look back at the table. So I made it. Now it's gonna make it come to life somehow. Do you hear yourself right now? Do you hear how absolutely fucking insane you sound? Make it come to life? That was a movie, Matthew. It's not real. Oh well, I guess you don't want to help me then. Fine, you sit there and I'll just finish up the rest. He threw his arms down like a child having a tantrum. He pulled the blanket back on the corpse, leaving its head and upper chest exposed. He pulled out some nails from his pocket and started to push them into various areas of the rotting skin and tissue. I just stared in shock and disgust. How could my friend have done something like this? How could he be so nonchalant about all this? I took note of the rotten menagerie on the table as Matthew attached wires and cords to the nails. I stood up from my chair and walked towards the stairs to leave. I slammed the basement door shut once I was upstairs and made my way to the front door. I could hear a storm starting up outside as the windows were hit with thick droplets of rain. Along with the rain, I could hear footsteps running up from the basement as it flung open. Where the hell are you going? Matthew spoke in the doorway with deflating lungs. I turned to look at him just before I opened the door to leave. Oh, Matt, I'm going home. But why? I just finished putting the last wire in and the extension cord is all hooked up. Matthew, listen to yourself. You're crazy. Those are pieces of dead people sitting on your basement coffee table. Do you really think a few strands of wire connected to an extension cord is going to do anything? But the movie, you said you wanted someone to do it? Matt, I know you're not that stupid. IT was a movie, for Christ's sake. IT wasn't real. Matt had an angered look in his eyes as he slammed the basement door and walked towards me. You know what? Fuck you. I spent the past month and then some to get this ready for you, and this is how you thank me. Thank you? I should thank you for stealing dead people's body parts. I worked hard on this. Yeah? And what are you going to do when you power up the cord and nothing happens? I could hear the storm outside getting stronger. Heavy rain and cracks of thunder could be heard. I swore the shingles of the house were going to get ripped off in an instant. I don't need this. Just leave if you're going to be like this. I am, and when your little experiment doesn't work, don't come calling me for help. Just then, the house was filled with the sound of thunder. It was deafening, louder than anything I had heard before. The living room lights flared up before you could hear the filaments inside them burst. Matt and I were now standing in the dark. Great, we're both pissed, and now the power's out. Matt walked into the kitchen and started searching through the drawers. I stood at the front door, the storm getting worse and worse outside. Soon, Matt walked up to me and handed me a flashlight. Here, I'm going to go mess with the breaker until it turns back on. When I get back, we're going to have a real conversation about this. I said I was leaving, and that's final. I tried to hand him back the flashlight, but he pushed my hand back. Please just stay inside until I get back. The storm is getting worse, and you can't possibly drive in this. Matt looked at me with a desperation in his eyes. I had known Matt for almost 15 years. I knew he was a good man, but I also knew he was stupid. Here I was yelling when my friend, my best friend, needed serious help. I sighed as I looked at him. Fine. Matt smiled at me before grabbing his coat from the hanger and moving past me to the front door. I'll be right back. Matt opened the door, and I could already feel the cold wind from the storm. The trees by his neighbor's house were close to being ripped up and flying away at this point. He nodded to me before closing the door behind him, leaving me alone in the house. It had been 10 minutes, and neither Matt nor the power was back. I was starting to get worried that he might have tripped outside on something and was now just laying in this storm. I went to the hangar to grab my jacket so I could go out and check on him when I heard something from downstairs in the basement. I turned my head towards the door and kept hearing what sounded like loud footsteps almost right beneath me. As quietly as I could, I made my way to the door and slowly pulled it open, standing face to face with the darkness below me. I turned my flashlight on and pointed it down, shining it on the carpet by the bottom of the stairs. I could still hear the footsteps by this point. They sounded louder and more frantic, but my line of sight remained clear of anything. I swallowed my fear and called out, "Is anyone down there? Matt? Did you come back in through the hatch?" Matthew's basement, while finished, had an opening hatch that led to the backyard through a back room and some stairs. I assumed that maybe he was hurt, and instead of trying to get back in through the front door, he just went through the hatch. I slowly stepped deeper into the dark, my light moving up from the carpet and into the sitting area where me and Matt had been earlier that night. That's when I saw the blanket on the floor and the empty table. I could feel my heart stop for a moment as Elle stood there, staring down the barrel of this haunting reality. The corpse, that hulk of stitched body parts with nails and wires, was gone. So was the cord that connected it to an electrical box. The box was still there on the floor, and I followed its cable to an outlet in the wall. When the electricity surged in the house, some of it must have found its way into it. I continued to stare at the table until something caught my eye from the corners of darkness the flashlight could not reach. Just behind the wall leading to the back room, I could see the outline of a person. But the outline was wrong, so very wrong. I quickly pointed the flashlight towards it, and all I could see were the 5 distinct fingers moving back into the darkness. I let out a slight scream before I covered my mouth. Just then I could hear the front door swing open and then Matt's voice following it. "The whole breaker is shot. I can't fix it." I didn't respond, just stared in silence. Matt made his way to the basement door and stared down at me. "Hey, what is it? Why are you down there?" I swallowed what I could into my dry throat and looked up at him, slowly speaking. "It's down here, moving." Matt looked at me, confused for a second before his eyes widened with a mix of excitement and terror. He silently looked at me and signaled to walk back up slowly. I nodded before slowly stepping up the stairs behind me. As I did, I could see the shadow of the thing move from its cover behind the wall and stare at me. Its eyes, two different shapes and colors, stared at me as the flashlight pointed at it. Its shape was huge, taking up most of the light space. Its stitching leaked a mix of red blood and yellow bile from ripped veins. I could hear it breath and try to make sounds which came out as moans and grunts. With every step back I took, it took one closer to me. I was at the top of the stairs when it finally reached the bottom step. Once I was standing on the kitchen floor, it started to walk up the steps towards us. I quickly slammed the door shut, and all we heard was the loud slams and bangs from the other side, mixed with screams and grunts of both anger and confusion. We both looked at each other with mixed faces of horror and amazement. Matt's creation was alive. It didn't have a clue as to why it was here, and it was angry. I heard it almost tumble back down the steps as it made its way into the basement. I looked at Matt as he held his shaking hands. I locked the basement door slowly before stepping away towards Matt, grabbing his arm. "We need to leave now." I quietly spoke to him, trying to keep my voice as low as I could, so as to not alert the thing below us. He didn't respond, just stared at his hands while nodding. I didn't know what Matt was thinking. Maybe he wasn't thinking of anything, and he was just in shock at seeing his creation walking around instead of laying lifeless on the table. Either way, I knew that we had to leave because that thing was getting more and more angry downstairs. I could hear it slamming and trashing everything down there. It tried to scream a few times to the best of its abilities, but it just came out mumbled and wet. Matt now. I grabbed his shoulder, which seemed to snap him out of his trance. He nodded at me as we slowly made our way towards the front of the house. I was grabbing my car keys as we heard a crashing sound from below us. Then silence. We looked at each other, waiting for the sounds to continue downstairs, but it just stayed quiet. Then Matt's face went whiter than it had been. "The hatch," he whispered. Did I lock it? You've got to be fucking kidding me, Matt." I snapped in a hushed tone. I took a deep breath, rubbing the bridge of my nose with shaky hands. "Okay, we just have to make it to my car and we should be fine." I grabbed the doorknob ready to swing it open, but something in my gut stopped me. I got this sense of dread just from being close to the door. I let go of the knob and backed up slightly. Matt just stared at me, confused for a moment before it seemed he too got that same feeling. We both looked at the door and listened as we could hear the slight sound of harsh breathing from behind it. Matt backed up more until he was standing in the open area of the living room. I just stayed, hoping I would hear the breathing distance itself from us, but no luck. Occasionally, I heard it push against the door, listening to the wood creak as if it was going to break in an instant. I turned to face Matthew to discuss what we could do when a hard pounding came from behind me. The thing was getting more restless. I could hear it screaming to the best of its abilities as the door took more and more hits. It got so loud it eventually drowned out the sound of the storm. Fuck, what the hell are we supposed to do? I started to pace around the room. The slams became harder as I could hear it become more enraged. And I was looking down at his hands, fidgeting with them before he stood up and walked towards the kitchen. "Where are you going? Did you think of something?" I followed him towards the back of the house. "Yeah, I'm going to go out and distract it." "I'm sorry, what did you just say?" "I'm going to go out through the back door and get its attention. Then you can make a break for your car and get out of here." Matthew sounded like he was struggling to get the last part of the plan out when he said it. "Like hell you are? I'm not going to let you go out there with that dash." He cut me off before I could finish. "Look, man, I'm the one who made you come over here. This was my stupid idea, and it fucking backfired. So let me make it right by getting you out of here." "Okay." I just looked at him as the pounding from the door got more and more difficult to drown out. I wanted to argue with him about it, but I knew I couldn't. My friend Matthew was many things, but one thing he wasn't was selfish. Nothing I said was going to change his mind, and I had to accept that. I pulled him into a hug without even thinking. "You gotta promise me you'll be okay, alright?" He chuckled before pulling away. "Of course, man. Who else are you gonna watch horror movies with?" We both laughed a bit before he made his way to the back door. "You're gonna hear when he leaves the door. Once he does, just book it to the car and go. I'll call you once I'm safe." I nodded as he smiled at me and headed into the basement. A few moments later, I heard screaming outside from Matt. The pounding at the front door stopped, and the monster grew quiet as the yelling made its way to the back of the house. slowly drifting away. Quickly, I pulled the door open and ran out towards the driveway, getting to my car before jumping in. I just stared at the house for a moment before turning on the ignition and speeding out of there. I waited 3 days after that night for a phone call from Matt. Every second I was on edge as I expected either Matt or that thing to find me. I should have known I wasn't going to get a call from him, but something inside me just hoped things would turn out okay. Last week, I got a call from Matt's family telling me he was found dead in his house. The police got a call from neighbors about a noise complaint, and when they went to check, they found Matt in the basement. He was practically mutilated from what they told the family, not even letting them see the body after they got him out of there. It was ruled a murder, but they couldn't find any evidence of who could have done it, as the scene was littered with different fingerprints of deceased people. But I know who did it, or more like what did it. Matt probably knew he wasn't going to make it out alive, but it doesn't make it any better knowing I have to live with the knowledge that he died for me. I know I should feel so guilty for everything. Matt created the monster, and he was the one who came up with that plan, but I couldn't help but feel like it was all my fault. After all, I was the one who got him into horror movies in the first place. I also have to accept that it's still out there. Who knows where it could be, but I have a feeling that it's looking for me. It's watching me from afar, waiting to catch me off guard and do to me what it did to Matt. I just have to wait and listen for it. Listen for its breaths and moans of pain as it wonders and asks why it's alive. As it wonders who made it and how it can get revenge for what they did. Story 2. What I'm about to describe is my personal account of an accident that happened about 6 years ago in Utah. If you're from the area, you might have heard about it on the local news. For whatever reason, it never made national headlines. One of my theories being that it got overshadowed as a massive political scandal was happening at the time, but I don't have an explanation. It's as if the world simply brushed it off and continued onwards. But not us. To our school, it was a tragedy that caused years of mourning. It broke families and took away best friends. A haunting event that, to this day, nobody fully understands. Nobody except me. I never told anyone what really happened that night. Partly because I never had a solid reason to, but mostly because my story is so absurd it borders on unbelievable. I figured people would write it off as trauma-induced delusion and told myself not to bother trying to convince them. So I buried it, kept it to myself for years. The authorities knew the when and where, and families got to bury their loved ones. It was officially chalked up to a freak incident of nature. And in a twisted way, they weren't wrong. So in a way, you could say I wasn't hurting anyone by hiding the truth. Today, however, I've decided to finally share what I've kept hidden for so long. Keep in mind, I don't know how to explain what happened, and you might end up just as confused as I am. Whether you choose to believe me or not is up to you. It was the end of our final year of middle school. I was around 15 at the time. Exams were done, the stress was behind us, and summer vacations loomed. Despite that, some of us were sad to leave our small private school in California, especially that it had a family feel that I hadn't experienced before, given the number of students was lower than in an average educational facility. I moved schools often due to my parents' constant relocation, but this place felt different than any school I had attended before. To celebrate and shake away the bitterness, people started talking about organizing something fun before we inevitably parted ways. There were talks of going to New York, maybe even an ambitious trip to Europe or Asia, but the organizers ran into too many issues trying to plan something on that scale. That's when someone suggested a wildlife resort in Utah called the Brown Coyote Resort. It wasn't as exciting as the other options, but it felt safe, easy to organize, and a chance to spend time in nature, something us city kids could really use. Surprisingly, it was also cheap for what looked like a luxury resort to most of us. It had pools, bowling alleys, cozy wooden lodges, and natural scenery that anyone could appreciate. It all sounded perfect. About a week later, we were on a bus packed with teenagers, excited and carefree, awaiting an adventure in Utah. We had no idea what was coming, and frankly, I really missed that time. The first day went smoothly. We arrived tired after a long ride. Teachers handed out room assignments, sparking the usual complaints and attempts to switch with other students. Some were already plotting to sneak into other rooms at night. We ate dinner that was waiting for us, unpacked, and spent some time in the outdoor pools and game areas. I was playing volleyball in the pool with a few other students and two teachers, one for each team. We weren't allowed to use a real ball because our caretakers feared we'd break windows or hurt other guests, so we used a beach ball instead. I was exhausted after a long day and eventually got out to dry off. Just then, someone hit the ball too hard, and a gust of wind carried the air-filled object beyond the resort's fence toward the woods. Since I was already dry and outside the pool, everyone nagged me to get it. I hopped the fence and looked for the ball. I saw it near a small cabin, probably rented by other guests. I picked it up and was about to return when something caught my eye deep in the woods. A pair of glowing eyes stared back at me from the darkness. I jumped and squinted my eyes, trying to make sure I wasn't just seeing things. I couldn't make out what it was exactly. The figure seemed roughly human-sized, but the thick darkness skewed my efforts to determine its size. The only detail I could really make out was that it was bipedal and stood completely still, as if studying my every move. "Did you fall asleep out there?" someone yelled, snapping me out of my trance. I was about to head back to the resort, but turned to face the woods one last time. The eyes were gone. That night, some guys in my room schemed to sneak into the girls' room on the other side of our hallway and brainstormed a plan on how not to get caught. I was too tired to entertain it and decided to just call it a day. My friend called me a killjoy for it. Still, my mind kept circling back to what I saw. Was it just a reflection? A hallucination? An animal? At that point, I wasn't entirely sure. Eventually, exhaustion won and I drifted off to sleep. Day 2. We were forced to sit through a lecture about local wildlife from one of the seemingly sleep-deprived guides. Of course, even weeks before graduation, our school needed an excuse to make this trip educational in the dullest and most uninspired way possible. After what felt like forever, finally, something interesting happened. The guide decided to show us a live feed from a nearby protected area. It was deer season, and we saw a few of them grazing around. I zoned out a bit, watching the peaceful animals living their lives on a sunny day surrounded by nature. It was way more entertaining than listening to a middle-aged man in dire need of coffee. That was until something spooked the deer and caused them to run off into the distance. Every one of us seemed to notice. Even the guide paused his lecture. He chalked it up to coyotes or another predator making noise, maybe even one of the deer snapping a twig and scaring the others, though the camera had no audio to confirm any of those theories. To me, however, something felt horribly wrong about the whole situation. It didn't look like they were spooked by a noise. It looked like pure panic, like something truly terrifying just happened off screen. My stomach twisted into knots. I tried to dismiss it as lingering anxiety from the night before, but I couldn't shake off the weird feeling that stuck with me long after that moment. It was almost like some primal instinct inside me was trying to send me a warning. The two reflective marbles in the woods were still staring into my soul and my memory. I barely remember the rest of the day. My focus was all over the place, and the memory of the activities is quite foggy to me. I couldn't sleep much that night either. Day 3 was more relaxed. We visited some monuments, explored rare plant life, and spent time at a nearby lake. Some of us even got to ride sailboats. For a brief moment, I felt like a kid again, away from the dread that had been following me lately. It was exactly what I needed to ease my nerves. It was a great time. The 4th day, the last, was meant to be free. We could enjoy the resort however we liked. That evening, we went on a short hike along a safe trail, accompanied by some teachers and resort workers. We split into 2 groups and played a game to make things a bit more fun before ending the trip. One group would write challenges on paper for the other group to find and record themselves doing, my group being the one that was to brainstorm the tasks. The guides would make sure the papers were easy to find and wouldn't drift off somewhere and pollute the environment. It proved to be quite effective at entertaining us. Everyone was laughing and trying to come up with funny or surreal challenges. A lot of times our teachers had to step in, as some suggestions were either inappropriate or too extreme, something to be expected from teenagers. During that activity, however, I couldn't shake off the feeling we were being followed, but seeing everyone else so carefree, I forced myself to ignore it. I wanted to enjoy the last days with my classmates before parting ways after graduation. I didn't want to let my paranoia ruin that for me. After all, this was the last time I would see everyone in this setting, a chance to build memories I would never get back. With that in mind, I tried all I could to relax and join my friends in suggesting funny things for the notes we left. It was then I saw something that made my heart jump into my throat. The guide immediately stopped us, and even they went pale. It was a corpse of a deer, lying right in the middle of the trail. To say the body was massacred would be an understatement. It had claw marks on its side, two of which were especially huge and deep, followed by bite marks all over its neck, with a ton of flesh ripped off. It was especially shocking, as we were told this area was free of bears and cougars, and the smaller predators in the area wouldn't have been capable of such assault. The placement of the body also felt very wrong. It was almost as if something had dragged it there on purpose, knowing we would be passing through eventually. To add salt to the injury, one of our teachers received a phone call that changed the entire tone of the event. Two of our classmates from Group 2 had gone missing. They were a pretty well-known couple at our school. The girl, let's call her Vanessa, was a big adrenaline junkie, and the two of them were known for being irresponsible. It was easy to imagine her convincing her boyfriend to sneak off somewhere once the guides weren't looking. Idiotic, but completely on brand for them. Given all the developments, the staff decided to call the game off and head back to the resort. Police and rescue teams were contacted. Some of us were allowed to help search the safer areas, while trained professionals searched deeper into the woods. I joined the search for a while. We called their names, used flashlights, they brought in police dogs, and even helicopters. But the hours ticked by with no results. Eventually, some of us, including me, grew too exhausted to continue, and we were escorted back to the Brown Coyotes. Back inside, I sat in a room with a few other kids. Only one teacher and the receptionist were around. We were mostly unsupervised and still scared, but also oddly carefree in the way only tired, traumatized teens can be. We used the moment to play games and stay up late despite everything. It was our last attempt to salvage something from this trip. We talked about what might have happened to them. Some mentioned the deer corpse. Others said they felt a presence following them during the hike. It seemed I wasn't the only one who had that gut feeling. Still, I stayed quiet. By 1 a.m., I'd had enough. The entire situation didn't mix well with the anxiety I'd been feeling since day one. Thinking back now, I don't know why I never told them about the eyes I saw in the woods. I guess I've always had a bad habit of keeping important things to myself. After the conversations turned more stressful, I made my way back to my room. It was empty and silent. I opened one of the windows and took a few deep breaths. The warm air felt nice, and the view was calming to my overstimulated brain. I could see an empty road, faintly lit by a few street lamps. In the distance stood the forest, and beyond that, the mountains. Everything seemed peaceful, like all the commotion had paused just for this one moment. I knew that somewhere in those woods were rescuers, police, teachers, resort staff, and my classmates, probably worried sick. I couldn't imagine what it was like to be one of the teachers in this situation. I sat there for a while, because being alone was exactly what I needed at that moment. It was then I saw something move in the distance. It walked alongside the road. At first, I couldn't tell whether it was an animal or a human, but as it got closer, I began to recognize its features. It walked on two legs and was roughly the height of a tall human, maybe 6 feet. But its silhouette was much more than just tall. It was long, reptilian in shape, with a lizard-like snout, bulky legs, and a long tail. Its head bobbed slightly in a bird-like manner as it moved, and in its jaws, it carried something long. As it passed beneath one of the street lamps, its form became even more horrifyingly clear. Its body was covered in dusky, gray feathers, darker along its spine. Its snout was stained crimson with blood. Its arms ended in 3 razor-sharp claws, and long feathers along its forearms gave the illusion of wings. Its powerful legs ended in talons, each foot featuring one massive raised and hooked claw. It looked sharper than a kitchen knife. In its partly open jaws, I saw a set of glistening teeth gripping a human leg dressed in ripped light denim jeans. The same jeans I remembered Vanessa wearing earlier that day. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I was frozen, staring as it carefully placed the leg onto the street lamp, almost as if it wanted us to find it, playing a twisted game of intimidation. Then it looked around, its head twitching in sharp, bird-like movements. It scanned its surroundings until it looked directly at me. I ducked beneath the window, my heart pounding. It saw me. I began hyperventilating, my mind spinning out of control. Fight or flight kicked in as I quickly sprang into a different empty room, fearing it might try to break in through the fragile window. I pushed a dresser in front of the door to barricade myself and crawled under the bed. It was all I could think to do. Then I remembered I wasn't the only one in the building. I tried to force myself to move, to warn everyone, but it was too late. The first screams rang out from downstairs. The floor was wooden, so it carried vibrations very well, giving me a horrifying insight into the scene downstairs. One by one, I heard bodies slamming against the ground, screams and cries for help one by one dying down. I heard attempts to flee, followed by more thuds against the wooden floor. Whether it was looking for me or not, it already made its way inside and managed to kill a bunch of people. I wanted to run. I wanted to save them. I wanted to steal a car and be anywhere else but here. But all I could do was sit there, frozen, and listen to a massacre unfold beneath me. I've heard loud stomps. Whatever was walking along the hallway outside my room now was too heavy to be a human. I could hear a sound of low rumbling and clicking, almost like I was listening to a bass-boosted emu combined with a grizzly bear or an alligator, sending unnatural vibrations throughout my body. One by one, the steps edged closer. It wasn't moving at random. It was listening. I could hear it pause every few steps, soaking in the silence, as if waiting to catch the faintest sign of life. Each still moment stretched like an eternity, the tension growing to unbearable levels. For whatever reason, the creature kept emitting weird, low-frequency sounds, which I could feel almost in my skeleton, to my detriment. I could barely control how much my body was shaking and how hard it was to mask my terrified breaths. I tried to cover my mouth with my hand as I panicked over whether this thing could actually hear me or not. That's when it started. The scratches. I could feel my heart pounding so hard it threatened to jump out of my chest, while the razor-sharp claws of my pursuer began studying the entrance to my room. It knew where I was and was now trying to figure out how to get inside. How to get to me. I heard the door handle go down slowly, as the only thing blocking them was the dresser. Realizing its efforts weren't enough, I heard it pounding on the door as if it was trying to kick its way through. Loud slam, followed by another. I was convinced I was reaching my final moments alive. My life flashed in front of my eyes as I heard the monster pounding on the door. I wasn't ready to die. Not like this. As it seemed the doors might give in soon, out of nowhere another scream could be heard. It seemed like one of the girls sleeping in a room near me decided to check on the noise and witnessed the monstrosity pounding on my door with force. I've heard an attempt to run followed by quick heavy steps and a loud slam against the floor once again. Sounds of agony came next. There wasn't a roar or even a growl like one would expect a monster like this to make. Just quick and precise assault of what seemed like a definition of an apex predator. Another innocent life taken away. I could hear the girl begging for help as the thing was likely eating her alive, pinning her against the ground with its talons. Seeing the sheer size of them, I can't even imagine the pain she must have been feeling at that moment. The struggle slowly became lesser and lesser as the only thing left was a sound of flesh being ripped off and chewed on. After what felt like an eternity, it began moving again. For whatever reason, the heavy footsteps slowly faded into the distance until there was only silence. Shortly after that, someone opened the front door and shouted aloud, "Oh God." The others were back to witness the massacre that had transpired downstairs. The monster must have realized more humans were coming back and fled. It is only thanks to that I lived to see another day. Everything after that is a blur. I remember the hospital, the questions, the numbness, the crushing weight of realization. 7 people died that night, including the missing couple. Their bodies were later found deep in the forest, unrecognizable. I could have warned someone, said something, anything, but I never did. Now I have to live with that. The official report? A bear attack. They claimed a black bear wandered into the resort and felt threatened. They even speculated there might have been multiple bears, considering the body count. What a joke, but it seemed to be enough to give people closure. The Brown Coyote Resort shut down after that. Ironically, you won't find any information about it online. Thinking back, if anyone in the government knew the truth, they probably did cover it up to avoid panic. That might explain the lack of media coverage. I mean, 6 out of 7 people who lost their lives that night were mere children. Thinking about it now, I can't believe how this managed to slip under the radar. Our school mourned. It was the worst tragedy in its history. I never left California after that. Despite everything, I graduated high school. I've avoided forests like a plague for the past 6 years. Recently, however, I was forced to find a new place to live, and I found the perfect apartment on the outskirts of my hometown. The only downside, its close proximity to a nearby forest. I didn't want to take it, but my poor economic situation left me with little choice. Every time I look at those trees, I feel them staring back. It could just be trauma. It most likely is. But that doesn't change one thing. The creature that killed my friends that night was intelligent enough to remember the one human it left behind. Story 3. I don't like spiders. I don't like it when they bunch themselves up so their legs look like tangled wires, and I don't like it when they spread themselves out like the radial spokes on a wheel. It was bad luck that when I met my wife, we discovered we were both scared of them. As the man, I kind of just wound up taking over spider killing duty. At first, this meant squealing while trying to lob a shoe at one of them from a distance. But as the years went on, I kind of just got tired of the stress and anxiety. Fear is exhausting. So is the pageantry of it. Jumping up and shouting and lots of running around. Over time, I found myself having less and less of a fear reaction to them. Don't get me wrong, I didn't want one crawling on my face, but it wasn't like they had me running away in fear every time. Lily was never great with them either, but it wasn't what I'd call worthy of therapy. For the first 10 years I knew her, she was a fairly run-of-the-mill arachnophobe. Things only got bad after this one night when we'd just come back in from an evening with friends. There'd been a storm outside, windy as hell. I remember putting the keys down on the table by the door, and when I looked back, she was pulling down the hood of her coat. She let out a sigh, ran her hands through her hair, and she looked a little puzzled by what she'd felt. When she lifted her hand away, there were thin black legs poking out from between her fingers. It took a second for her to react to what was all bunched up inside her cupped hand. Then she screamed and threw it onto the ground. I saw it for only a second. It was so fast. Then it was off and under the nearest door, and my number one concern became comforting my wife, who was having a full-blown panic attack. "Get it off, get it off, get it off," she screamed while slapping at her neck and hair. I hugged her tight, checked her hair, and then checked it again when she asked me to. Then she stripped her top off to make sure nothing else was clinging to her clothes, before I took her into the kitchen and we had a cup of tea while she kept scratching at the back of her head. "Little fucker," she half cried, half laughed. "I can't believe it. Did you see it? It was huge. One of the biggest yet," I said. Truthfully, I only had half-glimpsed memories of it scuttling away, but it had been big. Large enough that a pint glass wouldn't have fit over its darting legs. Just seeing it had left me feeling anxious, but at the time I ignored my own discomfort. After all, I'd hardly been the real victim. And it got away. She cringed. "Oh God, it's still in this house somewhere, isn't it?" I wanted to lie, but thought better of it. "Somewhere, yeah," I said. "But we'll spider-proof the bedroom tonight, and I'll go looking in the morning." "Thank you." She smiled mournfully. "Jesus, I just know I'm going to have a hard time sleeping tonight." She made me strip the bed before she got in it. And all night, she kept flicking at her fringe and the hair on the back of her neck. I felt so bad for her. If that had been me, I can't say I would have reacted much better. Neither of us slept that well, but I was mostly just worried about her. When you love someone, it's tough to see them suffer. But it wasn't just that one night. The second one was much the same. The third, fourth, and so on. It petered out a little in the second week, but then she saw a spider on some TV show and the anxiety came back full force. Every night was the same. I had to strip the bed of everything, lift the mattress, and check for spiders. She even got rid of her bedside table, so there'd be less hiding places for one. In the meantime, I was on hunting duty. In her own words, I had to find the bastard or she'd never feel safe in that house again. It's funny, but in hindsight, I can't really say what I saw go scuttling under the doorway that first night. but I do know I didn't try all that hard to find it. I remember finding some webs under the living room sofa that were real odd. The fibers were thick like the fake stuff they bring out on Halloween, and I had to peel them off the carpet like Velcro. I found a couple of these nests throughout the house, but I never mentioned them. One of them hit a hole in the floor that really should have alarmed me, but I just ignored it. I ignored a lot. Actually, I found dead mice spun up in cocoons, and something bore a hole through one of the kitchen cupboards and filled it with silk. Nothing normal about that, but I just covered it up with some cans and moved on. A behavior I find hard to explain in hindsight. Maybe my attention was elsewhere. Lily wasn't in a great place, and she was slowly getting worse. She cried a lot, and any little thing that touched her skin would result in lots of panicked yelling. She couldn't eat a meal without slapping at her arms and neck every few seconds. Things got real bad when I came back one night to find her shaving her head. She told me she got tired of mistaking the feeling of her own hair for a spider. So this was the simplest way to feel clean and safe. If you've ever lived with anyone who's had a breakdown, there's usually this moment where your heart sinks as you realize that what you're dealing with has transcended the norm. It's quite frightening, actually. Reminded me of when my mom found a lump. It's a very isolating sort of fear. I remember lying awake in bed that night and just thinking about how I'd found Lily bent over the bath, shaver in hand, with a patchy head like that doll from Toy Story. When she looked over her shoulder at me, she smiled and her eyes were so wide. I felt like I wasn't looking at my wife anymore. Have you ever missed someone while you still live with them? Made them coffee and breakfast and chatted about your day, but it's like nobody's there? Every day was the same. I'd tell her about work, and she'd tell me about how she'd scrubbed the bedroom top to bottom looking for spiders, or started pulling up the bathroom tiles to check for nests. At one point, I realized she'd taken a lot of time off work, but she wouldn't give me a straight answer, so I had to call her office. They wouldn't even answer my calls, which I had to take as a pretty bad sign. It came as a relief when she got sectioned. Everything came out all at once. She tried putting a hammer to one of the walls to find what was behind it, not realizing that it was just the neighbor's living room on the other side. I was at work during all this, but things clearly escalated pretty quickly, and the police arrived to find a partially bald woman screaming about spiders in the walls. By the time I got home, they'd already taken her to be assessed at the local hospital. I rushed to visit her, but in the meantime I had to call her parents, and it was a relief because I wasn't alone anymore. Other people knew what was going on, and that made it a little easier for me to navigate. Until then, I'd been afraid to mention it to anyone. I guess I was a little embarrassed, or maybe just not sure what the etiquette was for discussing someone else's mental health. She was only gone about a night. Not even 12 hours, really. The neighbors agreed not to press charges if I paid for all the repairs and Lily got therapy. Lily's parents are quite well off, so they helped us out with that. They found this clinic that she stayed at for a couple of weeks. It's specialized in exposure therapy, which really just means getting a person used to their phobia. Don't like water? Spend hours every day in a pool. Don't like moths? Step into a room with thousands of them. This is oversimplification, of course. It's a special program that involves gradual increases in the nature of the exposure. The first night, she called me and told me they'd had her looking at pictures of a spider and talking about her experience. They were literally just cartoony drawings, but she told me she found it hard anyway. She cried and I cried too. She was only a few hours drive away, but I didn't want to be away from her, and everything had happened so suddenly. It was only 6 weeks between that night with the storm and her ending up in that clinic, but in that short period of time, I felt like the ground had fallen from beneath my feet. 2 weeks she was in there. I don't remember them well. There were phone calls every night. She was getting better, she told me, and the doctor confirmed as much. Hard going, for sure. They had to sedate her the day she graduated from cartoons to actual photos of spiders. Apparently, she scratched an orderly up real bad. My time in the house was lonely. A little weird too, if I'm honest. I woke up at one point with cobwebs in my hair, and at some point I realized that I hadn't seen a spider in my home for a long time. Not even a little money spider. I briefly wondered about what the hell had been leaving cobwebs around the place, but never followed up on it. It's hard to get my thoughts straight. I do remember finding more dead mice all webbed up in the back of that kitchen cupboard. One morning, I came down to find a starling cocooned on the outside of the kitchen window. No sign of what it had thought. I just stared at it and sipped my coffee. Then I left for work, and when I came back, it was gone. Probably not a good time to tell you I was diagnosed with a kind of dementia some time ago. I guess that's supposed to help make sense of things, right? I don't know. Doesn't feel like it makes sense to me. It's not like Alzheimer's runs in my family. They say the neurons of a human brain with Alzheimer's look like a cobweb that's had holes poked in it. That's a good way to describe how my mind feels to live inside. Thoughts travel along a given route and then just drop off. Lily's therapy progressed nicely, though. I remember that quite clearly. The phone calls and the sound of her voice. Real vivid. Jesus, I missed her so bad during this time. I hate being overly sentimental, but it had been a tough and lonely 6 weeks. And hearing her sound increasingly happy and confident with each new phone call was like a shot of pure happiness right into my veins. I missed her, and I wanted her back. And when she told me, giggling with joy, that she'd held a little spider on day 10, I burst out crying right with her. I felt pride at her accomplishment, and I felt relief that things might be getting back on track for us. Like the nightmare was finally going to be over. It wasn't so simple when I saw her in person. She came back looking like the war wounded. I should say she looked beautiful, but I want to be honest. I smiled when I saw her, but it didn't reach my eyes because the woman who got into the car looked a lifetime apart from the woman who'd been living with me just a few months ago. She was thin as a rake, with ashy pallid skin and a shaved head that made her look like a matchstick. And her eyes, the look in them wasn't right. But she was smiling, so I swallowed the funny feeling I had in my stomach and pretended everything was okay. There was no work for her to go back to, and I managed to get some time off after speaking to my boss. It was just us, and that could be a weird feeling for a couple used to working 9 to 5. I was on edge, didn't know what to expect. She smiled a lot, tried her best to reassure me, and asked a lot about what therapy was like, and she told me it was fantastic. Showed me photos of her sitting next to big house spiders, some as wide as her palm. Had to fight back my own fear while looking at them. She told me that was day 13, but when I asked what happened on day 14, she said it was mostly just packing up and saying goodbye. There is a dark and uncomfortable truth to relationships, and it's that time only flows in one direction. My wife hadn't done anything wrong, and I didn't really feel any ill will towards her, but a distance had been placed between us. All the best will in the world couldn't undo it. She'd changed. Been changed, I guess. At the time, I didn't know how to understand any of it, but I wasn't sure how to treat her. When I kissed her, it was on the cheek. When I held her, it was like hugging a female coworker. I didn't know what my own feelings were, and I wouldn't until I found her one morning in the kitchen tapping away at a pint glass and giggling like a toddler. It wasn't the light and airy laughter of the woman I was used to. It was more like the laughter of a bunch of kids egging on a fight or cheering on a nasty bully. She didn't speak when she looked at me. She just turned back to the glass and kept laughing, flicking it gently with her fingers. When I walked around the table, I saw it under there. A very large house spider. I don't know what is normal for people around the world, but a UK house spider is big if its legs are wider than the palm of your hand. This thing was even bigger with legs bundled up against the side of the glass like spools of segmented wool, and seeing it made me jump way back. I realized I hadn't seen another spider since the night of the storm, and that thing all curled up with legs as thick as hairpins was a real shock to my system. I cried out at my wife. She started howling with laughter. I mean, it was like a toddler discovering cartoons for the first time. Manic and weird and just so fucking happy, but in a way that was a little alien because I didn't understand the thoughts and feelings that went into that ear-splitting cackle, and it was all wrong coming from her. I waited for her to say something, but she didn't. She just laughed until something in her got tired, and she slowly stopped giggling, but she still didn't say anything even after she'd gone quiet. In the end, it was me who broke the silence. I didn't have a clue what to say. The whole time, she was staring at me with her patchy hair and gleeful teary eyes, and I got so desperate to break the standoff that I stammered out the words. "He's a big one, ain't he?" Her face relaxed. Her shoulders slumped. She slipped out of the crazy like it was only ever an outfit. "They'll get bigger," she said, and then she lifted the glass, snatched the spider up, and stuffed it into her mouth. I didn't see it, not fully, but I stood, frozen in terror, and watched the muscles in her badly shaved head tense and relax as her jaw worked away, crunching at those hardened legs. Jesus Christ. The sounds were bad enough, but when she was done, she looked over her shoulder at me and smiled, and her teeth were smeared green and black with littles of bits of leg and chitin still stuck between the gums. I'm not entirely sure what happened next, but now I knew why I'd felt so different around her since she'd come back. I was afraid of her, like a kid around an abusive parent. I just didn't know what I was going to get. There was always this energy in the room that had me on edge. I'd sit there watching TV, but I wasn't really watching. Couldn't have told you what was on half the time. Instead, every ounce of my being was focused on her. Every breath, every motion. When she got up to use the toilet, I watched her intensely to see what she was going to do. The fact that she rarely did anything except carry on as normal was all the more unsettling, because I knew something was wrong, and I couldn't stop remembering the way she'd laughed with that thing under the glass. Nights were bad. A lot of the time I'd wake and get the feeling she'd just been watching me, but she was usually fast asleep, or at least that's how it looked. Sometimes there were furtive movements like she just rolled over. I got used to it, thought it was probably just in my head. But then one night I woke up and she was right there, face inches away from mine. I cried out, couldn't help it, shuffled backwards while trying to avoid touching her, and wound up falling off the bed. When I looked up from the floor, she had a completely blank expression. She was just looking at me like a cat watching a fly. "What are you doing?" I cried out, unable to stop the irritation from bleeding into my voice. She shrugged, just watching. Then she rolled over like nothing had happened. That night, I slept on the sofa. She didn't ask why. Didn't say a word as I grabbed my things and left the bedroom. I wasn't sure I would manage to fall asleep after that, but I did. And when I woke up, I had cobwebs in my hair. I was lucky if I slept more than a few hours a night after that. It came fitfully, if at all. I woke up too many times to the feeling of something tickling my face and chest, a sensation like someone running a feather over me. Every time I'd come to in a panic, but I never found anything except nearly invisible silk clinging to my skin. Life without sleep was difficult, and I struggled to hide my dislike for Lily. Over time, our habits and routines diverged even further apart. I stopped going upstairs almost entirely. Just didn't need to. I had work and the sofa and the kitchen, and the days when I came back and barely saw Lily at all were fine by me. I preferred being away from her. Something that kind of broke my heart, if I'm honest. There were times I wanted to reach out, but looking at her gave me the funniest feeling in my stomach. I didn't want to change things. Didn't want to get closer. If anything, I wanted to run away. And I don't mean that I wanted to flee my life and adult responsibilities in some abstract way. I mean, I felt a powerful urge to quite literally run away from her. It was horrible feeling that way about my wife, and just trying to understand those emotions was enough to give me a headache most days. I became real forgetful during this time, and it was a long time before I realized I'd forgotten to pay for the repairs to the wall. I think it slipped my mind. Emphasis on think, because I don't remember what I have and haven't forgotten. I just nailed some plywood over and left it, and 3 months later, one day, out of the blue, it occurred to me I should probably have done something more about it. I did find a toolkit in the kitchen that wasn't mine. I might have called someone out for a quote. I don't know. But once I remembered that I never actually fixed the hole, I was filled with this shame and embarrassment, and I decided the best thing to do was to face it head on and go apologize to my neighbor. I never knew a lot about the guy. He was an older man who liked his football, had a nose like a tomato, and spent most nights in the pub. I knew he lived alone, though, and when I knocked his door and there was no answer, it wasn't too strange. At least it didn't seem out of the ordinary until I went back inside my house and heard footsteps on the other side of the wall. So I went back, and I knocked a couple more times figuring he maybe hadn't heard me, but there was still no answer. I found this weird. He didn't seem like the kind of guy who would avoid a neighbor he didn't like. He'd just open the door and tell you to fuck off. I went back and looked, but couldn't see anything through his windows, and all I could see looking through his letterbox was a gray sheet across the opening. When my fingers came away, covered in a sticky thread, I had this terrible feeling in my stomach. I couldn't have possibly explained how. but I was convinced that Lily had done something. After all, it was him calling the police who'd gotten her into trouble. But it wasn't like I could kick his door down to check, and I wasn't going to go scrambling through any half-open windows. Fortunately, we shared a fence in the back garden. It was easy enough to jump, and from there, I could check the windows on that side of the house. He'd left the kitchen blinds open, and at first what I saw baffled me. For a moment, I wondered if he was decorating because everything inside was covered by a thin, translucent sheet. But I only had to pay close attention to realize that didn't make sense. When painting a ceiling, you don't throw tarps over half-drunk cups of coffee and plates of moldy food. And the material that covered everything was cloudy and made of thread and obviously some kind of silk. It took a lot of effort to control the urge to just hop the fence back and pretend like I never saw a damn thing. But if he needed some kind of help, then I knew I had to at least try. I looked briefly at the stoop by the back door. There was a lighter on the ground where someone had dropped it. It was strangely conspicuous and made me think that whoever had left it there had done so in a hurry. Didn't make sense that someone would drop it there and not notice, not unless they'd been otherwise occupied. I picked it up and winced when it came from the floor with a sticky, tearing sound. It was covered in barely visible silk threads. God, I wanted that back door to be locked. Couldn't think of anything worse than having to push ahead, but I tried the handle and it went down. The door popped open with barely any effort, and I got a good look at how every last inch of that place was covered in pale cobwebs that got thicker and thicker as my eyes drifted deeper inside the house. I couldn't help but wonder if they were strong enough to trap a person. Was my neighbor in there somewhere? Somebody was. I knew that much from the sounds I'd heard, but I couldn't see him in the kitchen. I wanted to cry out for him, maybe even go marching into the house and look for myself, but the hallway out of the kitchen had been turned into a web-lined tunnel. No straight lines, just a dark silky womb whose rounded funnel walls fluttered gently in the breeze. I stared intently into that darkness, trying my best to see if there was the shape of a man's corpse cocooned somewhere in the pale white silk. I leaned forward, my head and shoulders just moving past the door frame when the blackness in the tunnel grew legs. Dark carapace and segmented limbs exploded towards me so fast it was almost in the kitchen before my heart had time to skip a beat. And then it stopped halfway into the room, standing perfectly still and brazen in the fading daylight. A bundle of legs the size of a horse. A real-life monster. I didn't move. Jesus Christ, it took me another minute just for my brain to process what I was looking at on a conscious level. My nervous system was quicker, sure. It was like a blanket of disgust and terror was thrown over me. My stomach plunged to the floor. My skin crawled. My heart felt like it was going to explode. But my actual mind was blank. White noise and static. The creature was huge, so big its legs could just about fit in the hallway behind it. But in the kitchen with a little more room, those front limbs and mouthy feelers spread out like tendrils and gripped the doorway. It was ready to pounce on whatever had sent disturbances throughout its web. I've read that spiders can be a little like Venus flytraps. They won't always pounce on a single trigger. They need multiple hits. When I looked down at my feet, I saw that I'd taken just one step inside, but that was all it needed to be alerted. Now it had approached the initial alarm, and, half blind, it waited for another hint of something trapped inside its web. I had to wonder, would lifting my shoe count? Did I have a choice? I couldn't stay there. Looking at the damn thing was bringing me closer and closer to full-blown panic with every passing second. I had to do something, and I had to do it with some semblance of control. I slid my foot backwards. The spider didn't move. As soon as both feet were outside, I let go of the door handle and felt something sticky detach from my palm. It feels like an exaggeration to say that lightning moves slower. I'm not sure I have the words to describe how fast it was. I'm sure most of you have seen a nature documentary with one of those fish or maybe even a trapdoor spider, and you thought, oh shit, that was quick. But this thing, maybe it was just because it was coming right at me. I've never seen anything like it except for when videos get edited. All of a sudden, it was just there, and before I knew it, thick woolly paps were pinning me to the ground, and I was looking into a pink slit of a mouth framed by fangs as long as my forearms. They moved independent of each other. and something about the sight of all those wheel-spoke legs and segmented joints clumped together in its thorax sent my mind reeling. I said at the beginning of this that a lifetime of exposure had helped curb my arachnophobia, but there are limits. I blacked out. When I woke up, it was dark all around me. I didn't know it at the time, but the belly of the beast was my neighbor's former living room. It wasn't actually pitch black, but it did take a few terrifying minutes for my eyes to adjust well enough just to be able to see my own body stuck and wriggling beneath me. I was wrapped up tight, and if you've ever heard the refrain that spider silk is stronger than steel and doubted it, well, trust me, it's true. A few thin threads doesn't give you a proper sense of it. But I was wrapped in what must have been a half-inch of the stuff, and I felt like I was wearing 10 layers of lycra that was too small. There was a tiny bit of give, enough to let me move fingers or toes, or even bend a knee just a fraction, but that was it. It was horrifying. I'm not exactly claustrophobic either, for what it's worth, but given the circumstances, I found myself panicking as I tried to get some purchase. I kept thinking if I could get a finger hooked into it, then maybe I could start tearing away. I was desperate, but the more I fought, the more I realized it was hopeless. The silk was elastic and strong and covered in a thick, stodgy glue that only further limited my movement as everything I did spread it around until it was gumming my legs and hands together. It wasn't until exhaustion caught up to me and I was forced to take a short break that I realized I wasn't alone. There was another cocoon beside me. My neighbor had been a big man in life, podgy with a large pot belly and a head like a thumb. But in the dim light of that room, he looked like a skeleton wrapped in skin that had been found half decayed in an ancient and forgotten tomb. So thin and desiccated, you could hook a finger under the tendons in his neck and jaws. I nearly cried when I realized I'd risked everything to save a dead man. But that wasn't actually true. The error in my thinking became apparent when he opened his eyes and glared at me with pure, unbridled terror. He opened his mouth, and I was convinced he was about to scream, when instead he coughed and gagged and something wet and brown dribbled out of his mouth. It flopped down his chin and came to rest on the floor between us. It resembled a hairband encased in bile and vomit, and I was momentarily stumped until I saw a thin brown leg unfurl from the tangled mess. It's okay. My neighbor's entire body relaxed, his eyes vacant and confused, as Lily knelt down beside me and stroked my head. "Lily, you've got to get me, shoo," she said, pressing a single finger to my lips. "It's okay. It's going to be okay." Behind her, a shadow appeared. It had legs as thick as my wrist, and they reached from the floor to the ceiling. "It won't be much longer now," she added as the darkness behind her grew. "Probably best to just keep you here." "Lily, what the fuck? I told you they get bigger," she said, nodding toward the spider my neighbor had just spat onto the floor. "He won't be any real help." She touched my neighbor's head, but he barely responded. He just gazed vacantly as she rolled him over so that he was facing away from me. "For such a clever animal," she added as she parted his hair. "I'm always curious about just how much you miss." Something was clamped around the back of his head, a throbbing bulb of mottled brown skin and hair. It looked like a spider without legs. A tick, maybe. That's what I thought it was until my wife ran a finger playfully along its back and my neighbor let out a gut-wrenching squeal of pain. Slowly, the shape seemed to wriggle and writhe, and a long, thin leg emerged from beneath its body, and I realized I was looking at a spider wrapped tight around his skull, its legs buried beneath the skin and muscle of his scalp. For a moment, it playfully curled the leg in the air before returning it to the incision and sliding it back into place, every inch disappearing with a gruesome wet sound. It displaced muscle and hair, and when it came to rest, I realized just how misshapen his skull had become from all those legs wrapped tight around his head. "What the fuck?" I gasped. Do you ever find it weird that you can't remember what it looked like? The thing that came running out of her hand, she asked before reaching over to stroke my head. Her hand came away covered in cobwebs. Something about her touch revolted me. It sent strange shivers coursing through my body. A deep primordial need to get away came over me. That strange revulsion all over again, the same one that had taunted me over and over again over the last few weeks. Without even meaning to, I found myself convulsing and panicking my body trying to thrash violently, but with every limb constricted by that silk, I could do nothing except writhe around on the floor. I tried with everything I had to move my hands, to get some purchase on the silk and tear away at it to free myself. But it was no use. I could do nothing except glare at my wife and the enormous shadow behind her, the one that towered above us both, its great legs clustering around the floor and ceiling. At some point I grabbed on my trousers and clenched my fist and felt something small and hard. The lighter. I knew there was great risk in using it, but I had no choice. I managed to worm my hand into my pocket and find it with my fumbling fingers. My wife seemed oddly aware of what I was doing, and she seemed to tilt her head like a curious dog as I clenched my fist around the small object and used every ounce of willpower I had left to fight the violent seizures that racked my body and thumbed the trigger. The web went up in flames immediately. It must have been the glue, but the flames exploded across the silk like they'd been soaked in kerosene. Before I even realized that it had weakened enough for me to free one arm, the tongues of fire were already spreading across the floor where they found my poor neighbor. The burning sensation that crawled across my legs and chest hurt like nothing I could imagine, but I was finally free. I rolled over and began to push myself up, already desperately patting at my body to try and put out the flames. When I looked around me, my wife and the shape that followed her were gone. For a moment I considered helping my neighbor, but his body thrashed too violently, and although his eyes were wide open, spiders were pouring from his mouth, and I could not summon the courage to take another step towards him. All I could think of was escape. The house was going up like a tinderbox. It wasn't far to the kitchen, but the fire had already beat me there. Smoke billowed upwards and, trapped by the ceiling, started to fill the air with choking soot. The only escape was the back door, and I stumbled towards it, but was stopped at the last moment by the sight of my wife standing there. "You really are such a fascinating speck." I barreled past her, but to my surprise, she offered no resistance. I merely emerged into the open air, my lungs gasping desperately for clean air as I collapsed on a long, unkempt grass. I looked over my shoulder and saw orange tongues of fire were already leaping out of the windows on the upper floor. Left uncontrolled, the fire would rage and consume the entire row of terrace houses. I felt a moment of remorse, but there were already sirens in the distance, so I knew someone had noticed and done the right thing. But it wasn't over. Lily was sitting on the fence. I don't know how she got there, but she looked completely undisturbed. "I never once imagined that when that wind blew me into your home. I find such an interesting pair of people," she said. "What a fun mind to sing my legs into. I really had no idea what I was going to find." "Let her go," I gasped. "I have," she said with a shrug. "I did, months ago as a matter of fact. There were some incompatibilities, and it just made sense to move homes." She pointed at me and smiled. I've enjoyed living inside your head quite a bit, struggling to make sense of her words, but still somehow aware of their terrifying implications. I placed one hand on the back of my head and felt it. Felt her. The mere touch was enough to fill my mouth with a coppery taste, while my vision blurred at the edges. Something beneath my skin shifted, and I fey. That's it for today's creepy Reddit tales. Before we go, I just want to say a quick thanks to all of you for watching, liking, and sticking around. You guys keep this channel going, and I'll be back soon with more stories that'll make your skin crawl. Drop a comment if you've got your own spooky tale to share, and I'll see you in the next one.